My name is Bailey, and for 7 years I lived in a gilded cage. From the outside, it was a palace, a sprawling penthouse overlooking the steel and glass canyons of Chicago, with views that stretched all the way to the lake. But the windows didn't open more than 3 inches, a security feature my husband called it. Everything was a security feature. The car that drove me, the chefs who cooked for me, even the art on the walls, which was all insured and tracked by Microdot. But the most sophisticated security feature of all was the one I carried with me. It was an app on my phone, a sleek black icon with a silver V for Van Astor. Julian, my husband, the founder of the Van Astor tech dynasty, had designed it himself. He called it Family First. It was his masterpiece, a proprietary system that integrated our lives into a seamless, secure whole. It tracked my location, my communications, my heart rate, and every single cent I spent. It was all done, he said, under the guise of love. He said it was so he would know I was always safe. He said it was for my own good. He thought I was a perfectly compliant trophy wife, a beautiful accessory to his brilliant life. My days, as far as he knew, were a predictable loop of high-end consumption and performative charity. Pilates at 9, followed by lunch at one of 3 approved restaurants. Afternoons were for shopping at stores that were partners in the Van Astor corporate ecosystem, and for making small, respectable donations to his mother's various philanthropic ventures. He and his mother, Genevieve, would look at the data logs from my app and nod in satisfaction. Bailey was being good. Bailey was staying within her designated parameters. Bailey was the perfect, manageable wife. They thought I was planning their next gala, a glittering affair to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the company. And I was. But I was also planning something else. They had no idea that I had cracked the app's encrypted code over a year ago. They had no idea that I was using its supposedly unbreakable shell to communicate with a network, a hidden underground of digital ghosts and quiet helpers who specialized in helping women disappear from situations like mine. Every approved online purchase was a coded message. A pair of Manolo Blahniks wasn't a frivolous spend. It was a signal. A donation to his mother's pet charity, the Children's Literacy Fund, wasn't charity. It was a carefully laundered transfer to my escape fund. They thought I was a doll in their dollhouse. They never once thought to check if the doll had started picking the locks. They saw me planning their next gala, and they smiled. I was planning to bankrupt them, dismantle their legacy, and vanish like I had never existed. The moment it all broke, the moment the gilded cage became a prison of sharp, rusted iron, happened on a Tuesday. I was sitting on a cream-colored sofa that had cost more than my parents' first house, arranging flowers in a vase that had its own line item on our insurance policy. My phone buzzed with a notification, but it wasn't from Julian's app. It was a message from an old college friend, someone Julian had subtly but effectively pushed out of my life because she was a little rough around the edges. The message was simple. It just said, "I am so sorry, Bailey," and below it was a video link. My heart started that low, heavy thumping. It did whenever I sensed a shift in Julian's weather patterns. I tapped the link. The video was shaky, clearly filmed on a phone by someone trying not to be noticed. It was a conference room. At the front stood my husband, Julian, looking handsome and powerful in a tailored suit, a giant screen behind him. He was pitching a new enterprise version of the Family First app to a room full of stony-faced investors. He was charming them, of course. Julian could charm a snake out of its own skin. And then he clicked to the next slide. My face appeared on the screen. Not a photo, but a data map. A spider web of lines traced my movements over the past month. Little icons popped up. Pilates studio, lunch at the Aviary, shopping at Neiman Marcus. A larger icon pulsed over our penthouse. The slide was titled, "Case Study, the Predictable Asset." My stomach turned to ice. "As you can see," Julian said, his voice smooth and confident, "our proprietary behavioral algorithm creates a predictable pattern of life. We can forecast, with 98% accuracy, where the subject will be at any given time." He gestured to a chart of my spending. "We can also curate their consumer habits, gently guiding them toward approved vendors, creating a closed-loop economic system that benefits both our partners and our security protocols. My wife," he said with a condescending little smile, "is our most successful user. Her data provides the perfect baseline for a manageable, secure, and contented lifestyle. A contented lifestyle, a manageable asset. The words echoed in the silent, air-conditioned room of my apartment. The investors in the video were nodding, their faces impassive. They weren't seeing a human being, they were seeing a proof of concept. Julian wasn't presenting a security app. He was presenting a digital leash, and he was using me, his wife, as the show dog. He was selling my life, my predictable, curated, managed life, to the highest bidder. The flowers I was arranging suddenly looked grotesque, like funeral wreaths. The vase felt cold and heavy in my hands. For a moment, I had the insane urge to hurl it through the plate glass window, just to do something unpredictable, just to shatter the algorithm, but I didn't. I just sat there, my blood running cold, and I understood. The app wasn't about love. It wasn't about security. It was about control. Absolute, total, and now, apparently, marketable control. The cage wasn't just gilded anymore. It was for sale, and that was the moment a quiet, simmering resentment turned into a cold, hard plan. I locked myself in the master bathroom, the one room Julian had, in a moment of performative trust, allowed to be a dead zone for audio recording. He said a man had to give his wife some illusion of privacy. The illusion of privacy. I sank down onto the cold marble floor, the video from my friend's message still looping in my mind. A manageable asset. The words were branded onto my brain. For the first time in a long time, I let myself cry. Not quiet, dignified tears, but ugly, gasping sobs that tore through my chest. The humiliation was a physical thing, a sickness coiling in my gut. He hadn't just betrayed me, he had dehumanized me in front of a room full of strangers and called it a business pitch. Sitting there on the floor, surrounded by a fortune in Italian marble and brushed nickel, my life with Julian played out in my head like a series of damning flashbacks. It hadn't started this way. Or maybe it had, and I had just been too naive, too in love to see it. I remembered meeting him at a university fundraiser. I was a literature student, writing my thesis on narrative structures in Victorian novels. He was the young, brilliant tech prodigy who had just sold his first piece of software for a staggering amount of money. He wasn't like the other wealthy men I'd met. He was intense, focused, and he listened to me. He actually listened. He asked about my thesis, debated the symbolism in Dickens, and told me my mind was beautiful. He was intoxicating. He pursued me with a singular focus that I mistook for profound passion. He made me feel like the center of his universe. The control had crept in slowly, insidiously, always cloaked in the language of care. The first security feature was a driver. It came after a photographer from a gossip blog took a picture of us leaving a restaurant. Julian was furious, not at the photographer, but at the vulnerability of the situation. "I can't stand the thought of you being harassed, Bailey," he'd said, his brow furrowed with what I thought was concern. "From now on, Franklin will take you wherever you need to go. Just so I know you're safe." It seemed reasonable, protective even. Then came the curated credit cards, linked to the company. "It's just easier for accounting, darling, and we get better points this way." Another reasonable explanation. Each new restriction was a loving embrace that tightened just a little bit more. The app was the masterstroke. He introduced it about a year into our marriage. He framed it as a gift, a way for us to stay connected. "It has our shared calendar, a private messaging feature just for us, and I've preloaded all your favorite stores so you can shop right from the app," he'd explained, his eyes shining with pride. "And it has a location service, so if you ever get into trouble, I can find you in a second." He'd held me close. "I just need to know you're okay." That's all that matters to me. How could I argue with that? How do you tell the man you love that his concern feels like surveillance? How do you explain that his protection feels like a cage? I remembered the first time the mask had slipped. It was a small thing. I had been walking downtown and on a whim, ducked into a dusty old used bookstore, the kind of place I used to love before my life became a series of sanitized, pre-approved experiences. I bought a tattered copy of a novel I'd been looking for. That evening, Julian was quiet. He swirled the wine in his glass, his jaw tight. Finally, he looked at me, his expression one of deep paternal disappointment. "You were on Elm Street today," he said. It wasn't a question. "Why did you go to that bookstore?" I was stunned. I just saw it and wanted to look around. He sighed, a heavy, world-weary sound. Bailey, darling, that area isn't safe, and that store isn't one of our partners. The whole point of the system is to keep you within the secure zone. When you go outside of it, I worry. I can't protect you. There was no yelling, no overt anger, just that suffocating, manipulative disappointment. I felt a chill run down my spine. It wasn't about my safety. It was about my compliance. I had deviated from the pattern. I had been an unpredictable asset. I apologized. I promised to be more careful. It was easier than having the fight. That was the moment I truly understood that the bars of my cage, while invisible, were solid steel. And then there was Genevieve, my mother-in-law, the matriarch of the Van Astor clan. She was a woman carved from ice, all sharp angles and polite, cutting remarks. She was the chief enforcer of the family's pristine public image. I remember one of my first galas. I had chosen a beautiful, simple navy blue dress. Genevieve found me before we left, her eyes scanning me with the precision of a laser. She ran a single, perfectly manicured finger down the silk of my sleeve. "Navy is a bit somber, don't you think, dear?" she'd said, her voice a sweet poison. "It suggests a certain lack of enthusiasm. The Van Astor name is about vibrant forward momentum. A woman in your position needs to project success, not quiet contemplation. We have an image to uphold." She had an alternative ready, of course. A garish gold sequined thing that made me feel like a chandelier. I wore it. I smiled for the cameras. I played the part. Genevieve and Julian didn't want a wife. They wanted a brand ambassador, a living, breathing embodiment of the Van Astor success story. But the most pivotal memory, the one that gave me a sliver of hope in the suffocating darkness of that marble bathroom, was the discovery. It happened 6 months after the bookstore incident. I had been feeling particularly hopeless, scrolling aimlessly through online forums on a burner tablet I kept hidden in a hat box in the back of my cavernous closet. I stumbled upon a support group for women in controlling relationships. One post caught my eye. A woman was describing her husband's custom-built smart home system, how it monitored her every move. She wrote, "He says the encryption is military grade, something he calls asymmetric V-cipher. It feels like I'm screaming in a soundproof room." Asymmetric V-cipher. My blood froze. Julian had used those exact words. He boasted about it at a dinner party, explaining to some captivated tech CEO how he'd invented a new form of encryption that was mathematically unbreakable. But as I read on, I saw a reply to the desperate woman's post. It was from a user named Marcus77. The reply was just a string of what looked like gibberish, a jumble of letters and numbers, but there was a pattern to it, a rhythmic, repeating structure that I recognized. It looked just like the shopping lists I made in the Notes feature of the Family First app. The feature was so mundane, so domestic, Julian would never think to scrutinize it. He thought I was making lists of organic kale and artisanal cheese. My heart hammered against my ribs. On a wild, desperate hunch, I opened the Notes feature on my own app and typed out a simple message, structuring it in the same pattern as Marcus77's post. "Is anyone there? I think I'm in the same room." I hit save. I didn't expect a reply. It was a shot in the dark, a message in a bottle thrown into a digital ocean. But the next morning, a new shopping list appeared in my app, one I hadn't written. It said, "Artichokes, bread, milk. We hear you. Stay quiet. Listen." It was the first time in years that I didn't feel completely alone. It was the first crack in the wall of my soundproof room. Lying on the cold bathroom floor, the memory of that message was a spark in the darkness. The tears stopped. The raw, helpless grief began to cool, hardening into something else. Something solid and cold and sharp. Resolve. I got up and looked at my reflection in the vast gold-leafed mirror. My face was pale and blotchy, my eyes red-rimmed. I looked like a victim, but as I stared, something shifted. The image of the manageable asset on that projector screen burned in my mind. He hadn't just imprisoned me, he hadn't just controlled me, he had packaged my existence and tried to sell it. He had taken the most intimate details of my life and turned them into a line item in a pitch deck. The sheer breathtaking arrogance of it, the absolute profound disrespect. I had spent years telling myself that if I could just get out, that would be enough. But it wasn't enough anymore. Not after this. It wasn't about revenge, until it was. It became revenge the moment I realized he didn't see me as a person. He saw me as a line of code, a data point, an asset, and assets can be liquidated. I looked at my reflection, at the woman in the gilded cage, and I made a new promise to her. I wasn't just going to escape. I was going to use the master's tools to dismantle the master's house, brick by digital brick. I was going to burn his empire to the ground. The plan had been growing in secret for over a year, a delicate web of coded messages and hidden intentions woven right under Julian's nose. My ally, the man I knew only as Marcus, was the architect of the technical side. Through our encrypted shopping lists, he taught me everything. Marcus, I later learned, was a legendary white-hat hacker who had been publicly ruined by a rival tech billionaire years ago. The man had used surveillance technology to smear him, costing him his career and his reputation. Helping women like me, he'd once written, was his way of balancing the scales. He understood that the greatest vulnerability of powerful, controlling men was their own ego. They could never imagine that the people they saw as inferior could ever outsmart them. Our communication system was a work of art in its simplicity. Julian's app was designed to monitor and approve my spending, rewarding me for staying within his designated ecosystem of high-end brands and safe retailers. So we turned my consumerism into a weapon. Every purchase was a command. It was a language built on luxury goods. For instance, buying a specific pair of Christian Louboutin heels from a specific online boutique wasn't me indulging in a shoe fetish. The brand, the style, the size, even the color were all variables in a line of code. That specific purchase might translate to initiate passive scan of Vanna private servers, target offshore financial records, report back. Julian's system would see the purchase, flag it as approved luxury goods $1,000–1,200, and his algorithm would hum with satisfaction. Bailey was being her predictable self. He was so proud of his ability to predict my behavior that he never thought to question the behavior itself. The charity donations were even more audacious. Julian's mother, Genevieve, ran the Van Astor Foundation, a sprawling entity with dozens of smaller bespoke charities under its umbrella. It was a way for her to network with the city's elite and launder the family's image into one of benevolence. She had encouraged me to make small, regular donations to a variety of these funds. "It shows engagement, dear. It shows you care," she'd told me. What she didn't know was that one of those funds, the Nightingale Fund for the Arts, was a complete fabrication. Marcus had exploited a loophole in the foundation's registration process to create a ghost charity. To Genevieve's system, it was just another line item. To our system, it was the primary pipeline for my escape fund. Every $1,000 donation I made, supposedly to buy art supplies for underprivileged children, was being funneled through a series of anonymous crypto wallets and deposited into a secure, untraceable account under a name I hadn't used since college. I was siphoning off my own gilded allowance, one charitable act at a time. The system was more than just a tool for my own liberation. It was a lifeline. This became terrifyingly real, with the case of a woman I'll call Clara. A desperate message appeared on the network's private forum, a raw plea for help. Her husband, a low-level programmer, had rigged their home with off-the-shelf surveillance tech and controlled her every move. She had no money, no allies, and he was becoming increasingly violent. Her message was a Hail Mary, a scream into the void. But she mentioned the name of the software he was using, a cheap knockoff of Julian's early work. Marcus recognized the architecture instantly. He knew its flaws. Helping Clara became an obsession. It made my own fight feel bigger, more urgent. I couldn't get to her physically, but I could use my cage to help break hers. We had to signal her extraction team to let them know when it was safe to move in. The signal had to be something that wouldn't alert her husband. We found our answer in his own paranoia. He monitored her online activity, but he encouraged her to use parenting forums. He saw it as a harmless, appropriately domestic outlet for her. Working with Marcus, we crafted the perfect trigger. I made an online purchase, a high-end, ridiculously expensive baby carriage, the Silver Cross Balmoral, from a boutique in London. It was the kind of purchase a woman like me would make. Julian's app approved it without a second thought. But the specific model, combined with the purchase time down to the second, was the signal. It activated a tiny, dormant piece of malware Marcus had planted in the parenting forum's advertising code. The malware didn't hack anything. All it did was change the banner ad on Clara's screen. Instead of an ad for diapers, she saw an ad for a local bakery with a picture of a single blue cupcake. Blue cupcake meant go. The extraction team was outside, and she had a 5-minute window. She walked out of her house with nothing but her child and a diaper bag and never looked back. 2 days later, a message appeared in my app's shopping list from Marcus. It just said, "Stroller delivered. Mother and child are well." I felt a surge of relief so profound it almost buckled my knees. My gilded cage had just become a key to someone else's. The final piece of my own plan was centered around the upcoming 10th anniversary gala for Van Astor Industries. Genevieve, in a fit of what she considered magnanimous delegation, had put me in charge of the digital experience. This meant I was responsible for coordinating the online invitations, the guest database, and the payment systems for the vendors and silent auction. Julian thought it was adorable. "It'll be good for you to have a little project, darling," he'd said, patting my hand. He gave me high-level administrative access to the gala's dedicated servers. It was the digital equivalent of handing a prisoner the keys to the warden's office. The theme of the gala was a gilded future. The irony was so thick, I could taste it. For weeks, I played the part of the dutiful hostess in training. I sat in on meetings about floral arrangements and ice sculptures, all while Marcus and I were mapping the company's entire digital infrastructure. With the access Julian had so carelessly given me, we found the real accounts, not the polished, public-facing ones, but the dark ones. The offshore holding companies in the Cayman Islands, the convoluted tax shelters, the accounts where the real Van Astor money was hidden. Julian and Genevieve weren't just controlling, they were breathtakingly corrupt. My plan had started as a quest for freedom. Then it became a quest for revenge. Now it was a quest for justice. The gala would be their crowning achievement. I was going to make it their public execution. I was banking on Julian's most profound weakness, his arrogance. He had built my cage, so he believed he understood its every dimension. He never once considered that I might see it not as a boundary, but as a blueprint. He was so busy watching me, he never realized I was watching him right back. The first move felt like stepping off a cliff. The time for quiet planning was over. It was time to start shaking the foundations of the Van Astor empire. The gala was 3 weeks away, and the initial fundraising push was the perfect cover. I made my move on a Thursday afternoon, while Julian was in a board meeting. I logged into my Family First app and navigated to the donation portal for the Van Astor Foundation. I selected the Nightingale Fund for the Arts, my secret pipeline. Genevieve had been sending polite but firm emails to the entire family network, stressing the importance of strong early donations to build momentum for the gala. So I built some momentum. I authorized a transfer of $250,000. It was a staggering amount, enough to drain the entire liquid operating account that Julian used for his personal discretionary spending, things like weekend trips on the private jet and appeasing difficult board members. The app system processed it instantly. The transaction was flagged, of course, due to its size, but the algorithm cross-referenced it with Genevieve's recent communications and the approved status of the charity. It categorized the transfer as Gala Initiative, Major Donor Contribution, and filed it away. To the machine, I was just being an exemplary wife. Julian discovered the discrepancy the next day. I knew because the telltale signs of his agitation began to ripple through the apartment. He was pacing in his study, the sound of his footsteps a heavy, rhythmic thud on the hardwood floors. He was speaking on the phone in low, clipped tones. Finally, he came to find me. I was in the library, pretending to read a book on French Impressionism. He stood in the doorway, trying to look casual, but I could see the tension in his jaw. "Bailey, darling," he began, his voice a little too smooth. "I was just looking over our accounts. It seems there was a rather significant expenditure yesterday." I looked up, feigning mild surprise. "Oh? Was there?" "$250,000, he said, watching my face for any flicker of guilt. A donation to the Nightingale Fund. I closed my book, placing a silk ribbon to mark my page. I smiled, a bright, innocent smile that I had perfected over years of practice. Yes, isn't it wonderful? Mother Genevieve said we needed to lead by example, to really show the community how committed we are to the gala's success. I thought you'd be so proud. I reached for my tablet, which was conveniently sitting on the table beside me. Look, she even sent me a note about it. I pulled up an email. It was a perfect forgery, crafted by Marcus, with Genevieve's exact tone of passive-aggressive encouragement, praising my initiative in making a truly impactful lead gift. Julian read the email, his brow furrowed. He was caught. To question my donation would be to question his own mother's strategy. It would be unseemly. Ah, he said, forcing a tight smile. I see. Well, that's very generous of you, darling. Very proactive. He was placated, but only just. I could see the gears turning behind his eyes. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the fact that I had done something so significant without his direct instruction. I had acted autonomously. The algorithm had been circumvented by a simple, human-to-human, albeit forged, instruction. He was annoyed. The predictable asset had made an unpredictable move. A seed of doubt had been planted in the fertile ground of his arrogance. With Julian distracted and slightly off balance, it was time for the next domino. This one was more subtle, aimed not at his wallet, but at his reputation. I made another purchase. This time it was a ridiculously overpriced couture baby blanket from a boutique in Paris. A gift for a board member's new grandchild, I would say if asked. But the specific item, a cashmere blanket embroidered with a golden swan, was another command for Marcus. It meant, execute leak protocol alpha. 2 days later, a small, meticulously researched article appeared on a niche but highly respected tech security blog. The headline was innocuous: The Hidden Risks of Lifestyle Integration Apps. The article didn't mention Van Astor Industries by name. It didn't have to. It spoke of a popular, high-end family security app, favored by the ultra-wealthy, and detailed a small but critical vulnerability in its commercial version's firewall, the version Julian was actively selling to other powerful families. It was a theoretical exploit, the article said, but a plausible one. It was just enough to create a whisper of doubt. The fallout was immediate. Julian's phone started ringing off the hook. Worried clients, anxious investors. The Van Astor stock, which had been on a relentless upward climb, dipped by 3 points. It wasn't a crash, but it was a tremor, a sign of instability. For a man like Julian, whose entire identity was built on the perception of infallible genius, it was a public humiliation. He went into crisis mode, spending all his time in meetings with his engineers, trying to find the source of the leak and patch the flaw that Marcus had, of course, already closed. His paranoia, which had always been simmering just below the surface, now boiled over. He started checking my app data obsessively, multiple times an hour. But he was looking for the wrong thing. He was scanning for contacts with journalists, for suspicious financial transactions to known enemies, for any sign of external betrayal. He never once looked at the approved purchases from the approved stores. He saw a charge from Bulgari for $20,000 and let out an exasperated sigh. He thought I was stress shopping, spending his money like a panicked child. He called me, his voice tight with frustration. Really, Bailey? A Serpenti bracelet right now. Do you have any idea what I'm dealing with? I'm sorry, darling, I'd said, my voice trembling with feigned anxiety. Everything just feels so stressful. Mother Genevieve said, it's important we still look our best for morale. He hung up without another word. He was too busy fighting the fire to notice the arsonist. He had no idea that the purchase of that specific bracelet, a coiled golden snake eating its own tail, was the final command. It was the signal to Marcus, the code that meant arm the payload, prepare for synchronous execution. The gala is a go. The silent takeover was nearly complete. The snake was about to swallow the Van Astor dynasty whole. The night of the gala was a masterpiece of cognitive dissonance. The grand ballroom of the Peninsula Chicago had been transformed into a shimmering forest of gold and white. Crystal trees dripped with fairy lights, and champagne flowed from ice-carved fountains. The theme, a gilded future, was everywhere, embossed on napkins, projected onto the walls, and repeated ad nauseum by the evening's MC. The air was thick with expensive perfume and the self-congratulatory hum of Chicago's elite. At the center of it all was Julian, my husband, looking every inch the king in his castle. He was back on top. His team had issued a press release dismissing the security rumors as baseless corporate espionage, and the stock had stabilized. He was radiant with victory, his earlier panic washed away by the adoration of the crowd. I stood by his side, playing my part. I was dressed in a gown of liquid silver, my hair swept up in an elegant knot. I was the perfect hostess, the silent, beautiful partner. I smiled. I laughed in all the right places. I accepted compliments on my gala with demure grace. Genevieve, draped in emeralds that matched her venomous eyes, gave me a rare, tight-lipped nod of approval. "You've done well, Bailey," she murmured. "The aesthetic is acceptable." In her world, that was the highest praise. Inside, my heart was a cold, steady drum. Every nerve in my body was screaming. Marcus had confirmed the system was armed, the payload was live. All it needed was the final trigger. The trigger was Julian himself. The climax of the evening was his keynote speech. He took the stage to thunderous applause, a conquering hero. He stood at the podium, bathed in a warm spotlight, and began to speak about his vision. "They say we live in uncertain times," he began, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity. "They say we should be afraid, but I say the future is not something to be feared. It is something to be built, to be secured, to be managed." My blood ran cold. He was using the same language from his investor pitch. Here at Van Aster Industries, we don't just build technology, we build certainty, we build peace of mind, we build a gilded future for the families we serve. As he spoke, I discreetly took out my phone. The final trigger wasn't a purchase. It was the check-in feature on the Family First app, a feature Julian had designed so he would always know when I arrived safely at an approved event. I tapped the check-in to gala button. It was my final, official act of compliance. And it was the signal that unleashed hell. At first, it was just a few scattered phone chimes, then a few more. A wave of soft electronic tones rippled across the ballroom. Heads began to dip. A confused murmur spread through the crowd. Every guest at the gala, every journalist, every investor had just received an email simultaneously. The sender was an anonymous entity, the Gilded Cagebreakers. The subject line was simple: the price of a gilded future. The email contained a single secure link. Clara, the woman I had helped escape, was now a key operative in Marcus's network. She was a ghost in the machine, and she had just opened the floodgates. The link led to a meticulously organized dossier. It had everything. It had the full, unedited video of Julian's investor pitch, including the slide with my face on it, labeling me a manageable asset. It had technical documents, prepared by Marcus, detailing the app's true surveillance capabilities and the security flaws he had discovered. But the masterstroke was the financial data. It contained leaked statements from the offshore accounts, detailed charts showing the flow of dark money, and a full forensic analysis of how the Van Aster Foundation was a massive tax evasion and money laundering scheme. Julian was still talking, but his voice was faltering. He could see the sea of illuminated faces, the shock, the dawning horror. His own phone, sitting on the podium, began to buzz, and buzz, and buzz again. Each buzz was a notification from his bank's high-security app. I knew what they said. International wire transfer authorized. The check-in, my final act, had triggered the payload. The code I'd hidden in the vendor payment system was now executing a cascade of automated, pre-authorized transfers. The millions of dollars hidden in his Cayman Island accounts, the dirty money that formed the bedrock of his empire, were being drained in real time. The money was being sliced up and funneled through a dizzying maze of crypto tumblers, re-emerging as anonymous donations to a list of over 100 women's shelters, domestic abuse legal aid funds, and the escape networks that Marcus ran. A final 8-figure sum was being routed to my own heavily shielded account. He was being systematically, surgically, and publicly bankrupted. His speech trailed off. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the frantic buzzing of his phone. He looked out at the crowd, his face ashen. His eyes scanned the room, desperate, until they found mine. I was standing near the back, no longer smiling. I wasn't angry. I wasn't triumphant. I was just watching him. I held his gaze for a single long moment. In my eyes, he finally saw it. Not the compliant wife, not the predictable asset. He saw the architect of his ruin. The power had shifted. The king was naked in his crumbling castle, and the whole world was watching. The gala dissolved into chaos. People were on their feet, shouting, pointing, rushing for the exits. The veneer of polite society had been stripped away, revealing the raw panic beneath. Julian stumbled off the stage, his face a mask of disbelief. I didn't wait for him. I walked calmly to the coat check, the noise and confusion fading into a dull roar behind me. I handed the attendant my ticket, and she returned with a simple cloth coat, not the mink Julian had insisted I wear. As I turned to leave, a hand clamped down on my arm, hard. It was Julian. His eyes were wild, his perfect composure shattered. "What did you do?" he hissed, his voice a raw, desperate whisper. His grip was like iron. For years, a touch like that would have made me flinch, made me shrink. Not anymore. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at his face. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't struggle. I simply pulled my arm away with a quiet, firm motion that surprised him. He let go. "I did what you taught me to do, Julian," I said, my voice steady and clear, cutting through the chaos around us. "I used the tools at my disposal to secure my future. You gave me the app that taught me about surveillance. You gave me the unbreakable encryption that I learned to speak. You gave me the motive when you put a price tag on my life." I held up my phone, the Family First app glowing on the screen. He stared at it like it was a venomous snake. With a slow, deliberate motion, I pressed my thumb on the icon until it wiggled, and then I tapped the small X. A confirmation box popped up. "Delete Family First. This will also delete all of its data." I pressed delete. "You thought this was a leash," I said softly, "but you made the leash out of ones and zeros, and I learned the language. You didn't put me in a gilded cage, Julian. You put me in a gilded server room, and you gave me the master key." Just then, Genevieve appeared at his side, her face a terrifying mixture of fury and shock. The emeralds around her neck seemed to tremble with her rage. "You ungrateful little witch," she spat, her voice shaking. "We gave you everything, a life you could only have dreamed of." I looked at this woman, this architect of my misery, and I felt nothing. No fear, no anger, not even pity, just a profound sense of distance. "You didn't give me a life, Genevieve," I said. "You gave me a role in a play. The show is over, and I do believe the sets are being repossessed." I turned my back on them, on the wreckage of their lives, and walked toward the grand entrance. A few of the hotel's security guards moved to intercept me, their faces uncertain. They still saw me as Mrs. Van Astor. But before they could reach me, the doors swung open and 2 federal agents in dark suits entered, their badges held high. They walked right past me, their eyes locked on Julian. My exit was clear. Outside, the cool Chicago air felt like the first clean breath I had taken in 7 years. The line of black limousines and town cars was in disarray, but I wasn't looking for them. A simple, slightly beat-up sedan pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down, and the driver smiled at me. It was Clara. She looked different now, stronger, calmer. The fear was gone from her eyes. I got in the passenger seat and didn't look back. As we pulled away from the curb, I saw Julian through the grand glass doors of the hotel, his hands behind his back, flanked by the agents. The gilded future was over. It's been a year since that night. I don't live in a penthouse anymore. I have a small apartment in a quiet coastal town where nobody knows the name Van Astor. It has a little balcony that overlooks the sea, and every morning I drink my coffee from a cheap ceramic mug that I bought at a local market. The windows open all the way. Sometimes a salty breeze blows my papers around, and I just laugh. The money, the millions that I took, sits mostly untouched. It's not my money, not really. It's a war chest. I work with Marcus and Clara and the network full-time now. We use the funds to build new systems, new escape routes, new ways to fight back against men like Julian. We are the gilded cage breakers. My knowledge of Julian's systems, of how men like him think, is my greatest weapon. I turned 7 years of oppression into a curriculum for liberation. He thought he was a god, building a world in his own image, populated by subjects he could control. But he made a fatal error. He forgot that the people living inside his perfect, predictable world were still people. And people have this remarkable, infuriating, and beautiful tendency to be unpredictable. They learn, they adapt, they find the cracks in the walls, and sometimes, if you push them hard enough, they learn how to burn it all down. His mistake wasn't in wanting control, it was in believing he could ever truly achieve it. He never trusted me, not for a second, so he tried to control me. And in the end, his obsession with control was the very thing that destroyed him. The cage he so carefully constructed for me became his own. The last I heard, Julian was facing a decade in federal prison for fraud and illegal surveillance. Genevieve had to sell everything to pay the lawyers and the fines. The Van Astor name is now a punchline in the tech world, a cautionary tale about hubris. You know, for the longest time, I told myself that my plan was just about getting out. I told myself it was about survival, not vengeance. It wasn't about revenge, until it was. It became revenge the moment I saw my life, my humanity, reduced to a slide in a business presentation. It became revenge the moment I realized he didn't see me as his wife or his partner, but as his first and most successful product. He saw me as a line of code, a data point, an asset, and assets can be liquidated. So I liquidated his. I didn't just escape the cage. I melted it down and forged it into a key for 100 other women who were locked in cages of their own. And that is a future more valuable than anything he could have ever gilded. So I want to ask you, have you ever felt trapped? Have you ever felt underestimated, or like you were playing a part that someone else wrote for you? If you have, I want you to know you're not alone. Let me know your story in the comments below, because sharing our stories is the first step to reclaiming them. And if my story resonated with you, if you believe that everyone deserves the chance to write their own ending, please like this video and subscribe. Because the fight isn't over, and there are still so many cages left to break.